The sea off Greece poses a puzzling question with a disturbing answer. More migrant boats are leaving Turkey for the EU, but on the Greek island of Lesbos there hasn't been an increase in arrivals. There were 19 people on this boat.
Please help us, anyone, please.
A 16-year-old from Afghanistan filmed these pictures. He said it was shortly after masked men attacked them from a dinghy. The boat was in Greek waters off Lesbos on the 5th of June this year. The boy doesn't want to be identified.
Keep our machine. Destroy our machine.
All of us are too much afraid because two men have hit all of us with their sticks. They are wearing black mask on their faces, and the one have a knife. They just make a hole on our boat and cut the wire which is connected with engine.
We analyzed dozens of similar reports and videos, comparing them with geodata such as coastlines and the position of the sun, along with information from emergency calls, official reports and eyewitness accounts. Our conclusion: refugees and migrants are being kept away from the Greek coast at times by force. It seems masked men often attack migrant boats on the open seas, damaging them so they can't be steered and leaving them adrift. Sometimes they even actively force the boats back into Turkish waters, a tactic known as pushback. These pushbacks are illegal and against international law. But it's difficult to establish for certain who these masked men actually are, even though the evidence is apparently overwhelming. Evidence such as this video. A detailed analysis of boat structures led our colleagues from the investigative platforms Bellingcat and Lighthouse Reports to clearly identify the dinghy as belonging to a Greek Coast Guard ship. But Greece denies using illegal methods. The Coast Guard told DW, the operations conducted by Harbour Police and Hellenic Coast Guard are in accordance with international law and international conventions. We also asked the European border agency Frontex, which works closely with the Greek Coast Guard. Their answer didn't refer to the incidents in question. They just said all of their border control operations conformed to the highest standards.
My question to Frontex: you say you don't know, but how could you not know? And what steps have you taken to rebut what we have as evidence?
Hannah Hakiki has been watching migrants moving across the Aegean Sea for years and has seen a rise in the number of pushbacks. She has been monitoring the situation for the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights.
The EU is expected to stand up for EU law to be respected, and we haven't seen that. We haven't seen it in public statements made by representatives of EU institutions, and we haven't seen it in any sort of legal action that EU institutions have the power to take against member states not respecting EU law.
Members of the European Parliament and the UN High Commission for Refugees are demanding an official investigation. They say Greece has the right to defend its borders, but it must do so within international law.
And Notis Mitarachi, Greek Minister for Immigration and Asylum, joins us now from Athens. Thank you for being with us. Minister Mitarachi, is the Greek Coast Guard actively pushing back migrants in the Aegean Sea?
Absolutely not. We fully abide by international and European law regarding the protection of asylum seekers and refugees. We're facing a crisis. We experienced 9,800 arrivals in 2020, a large number, as you would understand, for the overcrowded camps in the islands and our asylum services. But we are protecting our borders. The Coast Guard is actively there to protect human life at sea. And I am pleased to report that in 2020, we have the fewer loss of life ever in the Aegean. We have only lost one person in the entire first half of 2020. Still regrettable, but a positive development for the protection of human life.
You may have seen those pictures of masked men pushing back those boats in the Aegean Sea, indeed what appears to be attacking the migrants in those boats. Is Greece using proxies to do that? Do you know who those men in those boats are and how they got there?
I haven't seen the pictures you are referring at. We're not using, naturally, any proxies. The Hellenic Coast Guard and Frontex and occasionally NATO are there to protect the sea borders of the European Union. You know that since March we faced an organized aggression from our neighbors. The attempt to cross more than 150,000 people in Evros was well organized, and the entire leadership of the European Union, the presidency of Council, the presidency of the Commission, the presidency of the Council of the European Union were all there to demonstrate the solidarity of the European Union. You know,
I want to talk
when
about...
you're using the migration crisis as a political tool for geopolitical objective, that clearly is an issue for the European Union. And we understand Thursday, the European Parliament in the plenary will be discussing an EPP initiative regarding Turk's aggression.
Do you feel left alone by the rest of the EU in dealing with the migrants coming to Greece?
I think there is not sufficient support for relocating people from the frontline states to the rest of Europe. We currently have 101,000 asylum seekers in Greece. You understand, for the asylum services, that's a huge burden. For our 38 camps, that's a big number. We would need more support for other countries to help us with asylum seekers and refugees. But at the same time, you understand, most European countries are not actively participating in a mechanism for the relocation of asylum seekers and refugees. And that's something that we need to work for in the new migration pact, as well as the common returns policy.
Minister Mitarachi, thank you very much for talking with us. That was Notis Mitarachi, Greek Minister for Immigration and Asylum.
Our correspondent Barbara Vazel joins us now from Brussels for more on this story. Hey, Barbara, it appears that there's overwhelming evidence of these pushbacks, essentially people being denied to come ashore, which is illegal. So why has there been no outcry from the ranks of the EU?
I mean, EU observers here, Christine, call the reaction of the official European Union a deafening silence. There has been some reaction now because just this Monday, the European Parliament put this on the agenda, and within one of its committees, the Commissioner for Refugees, Ylva Johansson, was heard. And she said, yes, of course, the European Union cannot defend its borders and at the same time violate its regulations, its laws, its values. And so she called again for these events to be investigated. The problem here is who's going to do that? Basically, even when the UNHCR, the refugee organization of the United Nations, a few weeks ago, called on Greece to investigate these events, it ends up with Greece investigating itself. The European Union simply has no prosecutor, it doesn't have a police, it doesn't simply have the possibilities to do this in an active manner. And so this is something that sort of turns in itself. And until we get to an infringement procedure, which takes a long time, we are just sort of running in circles.
Right. Yeah, I can't believe what I'm hearing. But OK, so why is the EU having so much trouble agreeing on a common refugee policy and a common asylum policy, Barbara?
That is quite simple, because it is the most toxic issue ever in the European Union. It's even worse than talking about money. Since the so-called refugee crisis in 2015, this has been sort of kicked up and around and about. And since some Eastern European countries, foremost Hungary, are blocking every attempt to find a common solution, and other countries hide behind that and say, OK, if they don't participate, we are not going to take in people. Every attempt at redistribution of refugees, relocation of refugees, whatever, on a communal level fails. There have been some single incidences where a group of the willing has said, OK, we'll take some people in. This is a big humanitarian issue at the moment. We need to solve it. But in the end, this is no closer to a serious, a real and a fair solution than it was 5 years ago. And it seems like a relatively hopeless case.
Barbara, so what's been the EU's response to the demands that the Greek government is making?
They're going to throw up their hands like they've done in the past with Italy. I mean, same problems there. We've seen it. I mean, the whole right-wing populist development in Italy was fueled by this lack of solidarity. And yes, it is there. It exists. It's a simple truth. European countries are not willing to take in the relatively large numbers and take refugees off the frontline countries' hands. And they haven't done it, and they are not likely to do it in the future. So this situation is just simply standing still, and it is not likely to be resolved. And that is what creates things and events like these pushbacks, because the frontline countries then think we have to help ourselves, and we create these very nasty events and incidents that are, after all, illegal. But it is not the political fault of the countries that are involved in it. It is the fault of the whole European Union in a way.
All right, that's Barbara Wezel in Brussels. Thank you, Barbara.